Hi, Vikas. How are you? Can you hear me?
Hi, Sinad. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear
Hi,
me?
hi. Yeah, I can hear you and I can see you. Hi,
Cool.
nice to
Hi.
meet you.
Nice to meet you here. And thanks
Yeah.
for helping out. Thanks for
Oh,
offering to
no,
help.
no worries. Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you for sending all the information ahead of time and context. That helps a lot. Nice to meet you. I assume this is our first time meeting, right?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. In that case, just to very briefly introduce myself, my name is Senad Cimic. I've been last 5 years or so. I've been coaching engineer leadership folks. Most of my career I spent at Amazon, where I spent a little bit over 12 and a half years. Second half of that, I managed global engineering teams, EMs, and so on across US and India within Amazon pricing.
Mm-hmm.
Also started as a bar raiser, where I did a little bit
Nice.
over 350 interviews. In between my Amazon roles, I also worked at a Snap or Snapchat, which is a
Mm,
social media company, as one of their engineering leaders. And I started my career a while back at a company called Thomson Reuters as a software engineer. So that's super
mm.
brief about myself. And again, thanks for sending the all the information and context. Yeah, so we can go through it. We can however you want to drive it. We can
Yeah.
either go through the topics that you mentioned in the email, or if there's anything additional they like to cover, we can go through that. We can start with that as well. Uh,
Yeah. So, yeah, I have been in this. You probably have gone through my resume
mhm,
or my LinkedIn profile.
mhm.
I don't have to tell like everything about myself, but
Yep.
yeah, the problem, so there was a recent interview. This has been a problem for me. They asked a question which I did not prepare for. So
Hmm.
then I realized, but that didn't go through. That was just one small question.
Hmm.
The hiring got stopped and all, but that's a separate reason. Uh, but then I realized that I have a bigger gap, and that's what I mentioned.
Hmm.
I'm targeting L6 roles, and if L7 comes, that's good, but L6 at least in
Hmm.
Amazon. So that's why I realized there's a big gap because
Hmm.
I could not answer that one or two questions
Hmm.
properly. I
Hmm.
was prepared for other one. I was preparing the wrong way. And then I started looking, oh, people are saying, oh, prepare the stories, but I don't know like how to map the stories. How much stories do I need? What is the quality of the story? And
Hmm.
the most important thing is what is the story,
Yeah.
right? But Amazon interviews are data driven. That's also I know. So that's why I reached out to IK because I'm getting help from there. I've been
Hmm.
like past. This is my third time I'm getting help in
Hmm.
IK. I joined IK.
Hmm.
So that's where I reached out to one of the coach, and then they said, okay, why don't you contact help? And then that's where we were meeting. So the
Yep.
main problem I'm having is what is a story? What should
Hmm.
I write down in a story? And
Hmm.
star, yeah, star format is important, but every company has different standards for star, right?
Yep.
So what should be part of star, kind of a template. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, and the most important thing is mapping between stories and questions.
Right. Yeah. So you're right. One of the there's two common reasons why folks fail behavioral interviews, especially at Amazon. One is they pick a wrong example or wrong story to talk about.
Hmm.
It's not bar raising. And I'll
Hmm.
get back to that, what's bar raising and why it's important. And I see, given that you already had some experience working at Amazon, probably, might remember some of that. The other reason why folks commonly fail is they could pick a good, bar raising example or story to talk about, but how they answer it, how they articulate it, it's misleading. It's not easy for interviewers to digest and understand. Okay, why
Exactly.
was it bar raising? What were those main selling data points and so on, right? So they picked a great example, but they butcher it when
Hmm.
covering the story, right? So
Hmm.
both are important. Now, bar raising, as you might remember from your Amazon days, it's basically means, and it is something that each interviewer should be asking themselves: is this candidate better than 50%
Hmm.
of folks that are already at
Hmm.
Amazon at
Yeah.
that role, right? And
Yeah.
that's um, that is tough, especially in a current environment, because you have a combination of hiring freezes. So let's say,
Hmm.
you're entering for L6 SDM.
Mm.
You have a lot of L6 SDMs that are great because the ones that were
Yeah.
not so great, they're not probably no longer there, right?
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you also have a lot of L6 SDMs that are managing other managers. They're getting ready to get to L7, but they're not
L7.
getting
Yeah.
promoted because there's no
Mm.
scope, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and same thing, same issue for L7s. You have a lot of great L7s. They're waiting for director roles at Amazon, but there's no scope because
Those-
hiring freezes, layoffs, and that automatically increases the bar, right? So anyway, that's
Yeah.
why it's even more important to make sure that you have bar raising stories and how you communicate and all that, right? Now, the
Mm-hmm.
other thing is you mentioned how do you now you're it looks like you already did you mention that you already have Amazon interview coming up or you're just preparing in general?
I'm targeting totally Amazon. I've applied for positions. A
Mhm.
few, one of my previous colleagues who was a good friend of mine, who is a good friend of mine, has reached out to directly the hiring managers because he's
Okay, great.
inside
Okay.
Amazon. So
Okay.
I'm hoping something will come up.
Okay, sounds good. So you probably are, remember the Amazon leadership principles, right? And the
Yes.
way behavioral aspects are driven. Now, here to take a step back, how interview loops look like for L6 SDMs. There's going to be obviously there's going to be technical data points, so things like system design. So brush up
Mm-hmm.
on that,
Mm-hmm.
and there's going to be some other technical competencies that might be covered here and there, like how you manage and raise the bar on engineering and operational excellence. And so on. Uh, it might be, depending on the type of team, might be around, what, how you, for instance, bring in new technology and, so some of those things, but those usually be covered as part of behavioral, so
Right.
they're
Mm-hmm.
gonna try to cover both, right? So anyway, that's one part. The other part is leadership principles, right? And all the behavioral questions are mapped to leadership principles and so on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now, those are more or less standard. There's about 10-ish or so important leadership principles to prepare for, right? And each one comes with its own list of questions, potential questions, and so on. Now, when it comes to preparing for those, to your point, sure, you can prepare some stories ahead of time, right? So as you go through those most important leadership principles, you can kind of predict, not predict, but based on the online resources and these kind of mocks, you can kind of see, okay, what are some of the questions in each leadership principle that are likely to be asked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then prepare stories for those.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps, going through that process, it helps because you have the stories immediately ready to go in your back pocket if asked, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then also um, as you go through a preparation process, it and you discuss, with folks like myself and others on who is the story good or why not, and so on. It helps you calibrate yourself on what is a good
Yeah.
story versus not so good story, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's very important. That process is very important because no matter how much you prepare ahead of time stories, you're still gonna be asked questions that you're hearing for the first time, most likely, right?
Right. Right.
So,
Right.
for those questions, if some of those questions might overlap with some of the things that you did prepare for, okay, great. In that case, you can use some of the prepared stories. But if not, then you need to be quick on your feet to figure out
Yes.
what story to come up with, and that process is also very important.
Mm.
So, as part of these kind of sessions and mock interviews and so on, you help coach yourself on to be quick on your feet and be able to quickly pick up, the bar raising story based on,
Mm.
your experience and so on.
Mm.
And I'll get to that, what are some of the ideas how to navigate those kind of questions, that you're hearing for the very first time and so on.
Yeah.
Well, actually, yeah, we can go about that right now. Now, what is a bar raising story for each of the question? A lot of times it depends on what the topic is and so on, right? And there's a lot of nuances and so on. But here, if I have to generalize it, um, in general, on a very high level, make sure that examples that you talk about, because you're going to have a bunch of examples to pick from, right? Whatever
Yeah.
question I ask you, chances are you're
Yeah.
going to have, based on your experience, you're going to have multiple examples. So it's important that you stack rank and effectively and you pick the most bar raising example, right? And
Yeah.
here are some of the factors to consider when you kind of comparing examples. One is scope and impact, right? So why was it, whatever the question is, ideally you should be able to explain and articulate to the interviewer in a situation part, so in the very beginning of your
Mm.
answer, why was it critical to the company, right? And here you can use some data points, non-confidential data points, for instance, maybe how much money or revenue it's about to generate, or maybe it
Mm-hmm.
had strategic impact, or maybe it was regulatory risk, meaning that, if it doesn't comply with regulations, well, the
Mm-hmm.
whole business is out, and so on. So it could be, a lot of different data points there they can consider, but whatever it is, try to map it to some sort of data points, even if they're proxy data points on why it is important, why it's critical, and why should interviewer care, right? You don't want to
Mm-hmm.
pick example that interviewer gets a feeling, okay, well, if you didn't do it, nothing would happen.
I don't
You know
have
what I
it.
mean? So it
Mm-hmm.
needs to be very important, right? So that's one thing. So, the criticality or the impact needs to be important. The other thing is that also is just as equally as important is complexity.
Mm-hmm.
So why was it challenging and why was it complex to do, right? So you can pick something that was very clear to the interviewer why this project or whatever it is matters to the company. But if it sounds super simple to the point that any SDM candidate should be able to do, then okay, then all of a sudden it's not bar raising anymore, right? So make
Mm-hmm.
sure that that complexity is well articulated, right? And when I say complexity, there could be a lot of different ways how you demonstrate complexity. It doesn't necessarily need to be technical complexity. I mean, technical complexity, sure, that's one category, but it could be people related, it could be budget related, it could be related to the number of teams or, legal issues, or I mean, whatever it is, there's a whole bunch of different types of
Mm-hmm.
complexities. And sometimes, oftentimes it's a combination of, more than just one, right? So
Mm-hmm.
in your situation part, demonstrate that, briefly explain why was it challenging, why was it complex, why makes it so hard
Mm-hmm.
that I don't think most candidates or most, good L6 SDMs at Amazon would be able to solve it the same way, right? So those two things are very important. And then the third and fourth one are kind of self-explanatory, action
Yeah.
items, so how you approach it, actions that you took, how you exercise good judgment, how you went above and beyond, you influence folks, you got folks aligned, you stepped in when needed, you effectively delegated as well. And then the result, right? Okay, in the end, was it successful? Was it not successful? Why? Back it up with some sort of metrics,
Mm-hmm.
around the impact and so on. So if you use this framework, typically it helps folks to calibrate on more effectively on what is what are the bar raising examples that you should use and how you kind of stack rank the examples. Now, I mean, this is very super high level. There's a lot more nuances that go into it depending on the type of question and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll pause here for a moment, in case you have any clarification questions or subtopics you'd like to chat about.
Yeah, I think thanks for providing this. I think creating a situation which is complex enough and
Mm.
impactful with a higher scope is more important than, you know, the summary of what I heard from
Mhm.
you is more important than, I mean, and then actions will follow because then you're
Yeah.
solving it, which is
Well,
solving it.
yeah, both, yeah, actions will follow, but you want to make sure the actions part also it makes sense and it's also bar raising, right? So, for example, if you when you start talking about a problem situation that's very, very complex, well, that immediately engages me as an interviewer. Okay, yeah, this was truly complex. I wonder how you did it, right? And then if you actually solve it the right way, great, then it stays bar raising answer. But if it turns out that okay, maybe it was super complex, super challenging, but you only did 20% and some other folks jumped in and
Ah,
helped and did the other 80%, well, then all of a
okay.
sudden it's no longer bar raising,
Okay.
right?
So basically, I should pick up an example where I solved it,
Uh, good question.
including
No,
no,
sorry.
okay. Yeah, including getting help from outside. Of course, I cannot solve any challenging problem myself,
Yeah,
including get from help. But what was my contribution in it? And it has to be
yeah,
a broader
yeah. So it
one.
needs to be very clear now how much it should be you solving it versus delegating versus getting help. It kind of depends on what the topic is, right? So, for example, if it is technical challenge like design or figuring out how to use new technology. Well, I probably wouldn't expect you to do 100% of it. You're not going to design things yourself, right? But
Yeah.
instead, you're going to guide your engineers effectively, your senior engineers, principals, and so on, right? And collaborate and work with the
Mm,
outside team and effectively guide your team, to make sure they come up with
mm,
adequate solution, in a reasonable time frame and so on, right? So, delegation is important in those kind of situations, and then also engaging with others to collect their inputs and so on, right?
mm, mm,
However, there could be other questions, like let's say where there's some sort of conflict, right? Yeah, I don't know, your team has a conflict with another team, or maybe with few teams out there, right?
yeah.
Well, you as a manager, probably I would expect you to have to be more engaged there, resolving those conflicts if it is high level conflict versus, let's say, for instance, asking your manager to help, or
Mm,
asking somebody else to help, right? So
mm,
how much involvement there is, it kind of depends on the topic and the type of question. But
mm,
it's not always 100%, you doing everything yourself.
yeah.
So generally speaking, there's going to be some level of delegation that you can talk about, but you want to make sure that, especially for Amazon, that there's a fine line. You don't want to come out as a micromanager that takes away opportunities from your folks on your team and so on. But at the same time, you definitely don't want to come as somebody that always delegates and just always operates at a high level without ability to roll up sleeves and do the work if needed and
Yeah.
jump in and
Yeah.
help unblock the team and so on,
Okay.
right? So you
Okay.
want to
Yeah. Yeah.
balance it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I got it. Maybe when I pick up examples and I work through examples, then these things will be much better.
Mm.
Okay. And result is basically maybe what it's in the situation I mentioned. That's basically solving that. Plus, if there's an additional benefit.
Yes, yes. So a result, yeah, what happened in the very end, right? So let's say, I don't know, it's example about some sort of project, right? Okay. You deliver this project successfully, right? So use metrics there. Was it delivered in time? Was it delivered successfully? Meaning,
Mhm.
does it accumulate financial benefit as predicted, right? Do customers like it? Were there any critical issues or incidents
Mm,
when rolling it out, right?
mm,
This demonstrates high quality and so on. Long term, how is it doing? Is it projected? Maybe so far
mhm,
it's attributed this much revenue. This is how much
mhm,
growth there is anticipated over the next 12 months, so in the
mhm,
long term, how is it doing, right?
mhm,
Um, those kind of things. I mean, again, these are kind of these metrics might be specific to the rollouts type
yeah.
of examples, but any other kind of example, you should also think about okay, what are the metrics that you can utilize, right? Then you can use
Mm,
and so on. The other very important thing to consider, including either as a result or immediately after result, is learnings. So STAR is sometimes called STAR L format,
mhm,
and L is optional for learnings. Now, learnings I would consider including in your main answer, especially if there is obvious learnings. So let's say if you talk about example, and then I, as interviewer, might get a feeling that okay, there was obviously, there were either process gaps or mistakes or something like that, right? So if you get that feeling, then and the example you're talking about has those kind of risks, then immediately address it with learnings, because then you're telling interviewer you're aware of what happened. You have a good framework in place to learn from mistakes and scale those learnings across your
mm,
team. And what really makes learning examples bar raising is how you ran, post-mortem process and so on, not just for benefit of your team, but how you scale those learnings across other teams. So let's
mm,
say, for instance, your team failed somewhere or did something that wasn't ideal. Then you conducted post-mortem and went through that process, and you identified action items and learnings that then you applied, you influenced other managers, directors, and so on to adopt those learnings, and therefore you had bunch of other teams that benefited from it, right? And that's
yeah,
great because that showcases your ability to
yeah,
scale the impact, be a larger force multiplier, influence others to adopt the best practices and
yeah,
so on.
yeah. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. As I'm talking to you, like I'm now these some of the examples that is coming to my mind that was from past are coming to reality. Actually, I think I can
Mhm.
use them. Okay,
Okay.
good. Yeah, I think let's move ahead to the
Yeah. Um,
further final
Anything
details.
else on the first one, identifying and collecting high quality stories? So
So,
sorry, go
what is a story? Like when I have a lot of examples from my past,
ahead. Mhm.
but if I start telling you, you said, oh, I mean, it's like filtering out. Oh, this is a good example. This is not a good example. Good
Yeah.
example, not good example. What is a good story?
So a good story is so first of all, whatever story you're using, right, it needs to be directly addressing the question, right? So that's one. The other thing is what's good versus not so good is kind of put yourself in an interviewer's shoes, as you're going through the preparation process. The story that you're about to tell, why is it impressive to the point where I wouldn't expect other, good L6 SDMs to be able to do? So if the
Hmm.
story, whatever the story is, it could be project release, it could be managing poor performer, it could be hiring a team, it could be resolving conflict, whatever it is, whatever the topic is, if it is something that any good L6 SDM should be able to figure out, then it's not a good story.
Hmm.
So you need to have some sort of distinguishing details and bar raising data points in those stories, right?
Hmm.
And why are you proud of it, right? Make
Hmm.
sure that those things come through, and those kind of things typically help separate you from the rest of the candidates, right?
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
the other, so that's criteria number one, and that kind of goes back into, the stack ranking kind of, stories like what we talked about that process. The other thing is red flags, right? So you could have a story that you think it's bar raising, but if throughout the story there is some sort of red flag, then it's all of a sudden, bar raising story turns out into not bar raising story.
Hmm.
So a lot of times, for instance, I would have, candidates, they talk about a great example, but then they mention something in the example that it is a red flag or a yellow flag. And
Hmm.
it doesn't necessarily even need to be related to the example, right?
Hmm.
Maybe for instance, I don't know, let's say we talk about the, I don't know, type of question like tell me about the most challenging project or most complex project you and your team deliver, right? And let's say everything is great, is super challenging project and delivered in time, and all that. But then maybe you mention a comment that could indicate that maybe you ruined some relationships along the way. Maybe
Hmm.
things got escalated between you and dependencies and so on. Well, then all of a sudden yeah, the project aspect of it, is bar raising, but then you bring up this a potential red flag, and then that's a risk, right? So you want to make
Hmm.
sure that those things, do not come up, or that you minimize the chance of those risks coming
Hmm.
up.
So, for example, one very common question that is I've heard across the board. Okay, tell me about a time when you managed a poor performer. Very
Yeah,
common question, right?
yeah, yeah. And
Now,
very, by the way, also very, very important, especially these days.
yes, yes, yes. Okay, so these days it become more important. So now the problem is, you know, given the Amazon culture,
Mhm.
it is better to uh, challenge the person with a higher level. So most of the time, 90% of cases, person will quit or you
Uh,
will let it go. Man, this is just personal example I'm seeing. I'm
yeah.
not telling that this is a good example to tell in the interview.
Mhm.
So, but but I have examples because I worked in Salesforce. The culture is totally different
Mhm.
over there. Where if I do too many pips, then it's a red flag on me. So the
Yeah.
first
So,
really true effort from my side, even before putting in the dev plan, is to
mhm.
make sure that I work with person maybe one to
Mhm.
2 months to
Yeah.
ensure that person is really not performing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's a process at Amazon as well. So you don't, when somebody has performance issues, you don't put PIP right away. Instead, you try to coach them. Typically in 90+% of cases, it's not like, oh wow, this person needs to be PIP right away, right? I mean, there's
Yeah.
some exceptions, but usually it's kind of like what you're saying. Somebody's struggling, so okay, informally engage with them. Okay, well, how can I help? Coach them and all that. And if the trend continues for say 30 to 60 days, yeah, then you start more formal plan. And
Yeah.
that's followed at Amazon as well. Now, I like that you brought up the cultural aspects and differences, and that's another thing, right? You want to make, what's good answer at one company might not be good answer at another
Yes,
company,
yes,
right? So keep that
exactly.
in mind as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
for
so
poor performer, sorry, go ahead.
so for Amazon purpose, it's better to give an example for the person who has actually moved out of the
Uh,
company.
Not well, it could go. So for that specific question, it could go either way, right? And you can pick a example where you successfully coach somebody up or move managed out. But what is important is that couple important things I like to highlight as you think about examples. Think about example where the person is in high level. Don't pick example junior engineer or mid-level engineer because every manager, experienced manager out there, they manage poor performers that were, junior or mid-level.
Hmm.
It's much more challenging to manage senior or staff engineer or a TPM or some sort of, high-level specialist, right? Because they're more critical to the team. Therefore, it adds complexity how you manage them, how you mitigate concerns. It also, yeah, it's also required.
Hmm.
The managers have higher integrity, right? Because a lot of managers out there they overprotect their senior talent. They don't want
Hmm.
to lose it because the critical team and all that, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is managing out versus not. What's more important is did you use some sort of formal process, right? So
Hmm.
pick an example where you did use formal process. And the reason why I
Okay.
say that is because a lot of folks that struggle initially, it always starts with informal coaching, and therefore a lot of managers have a lot of examples of informal coaching, right? But it takes more integrity, right? And it's tougher decision to actually come with, to move somebody into the pip, right? So use those pip examples for interview purpose. They tend to be more impressive, and bar reason because as you know, it's much more challenging manage somebody through PIP versus just informal coaching and say, okay, well, no
Uh,
more concerns, you're done, right?
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and also it indicates, the fact that they went through the PIP, that means they were significant performance concerns you need to manage versus if
Hmm.
you manage somebody informally, that means it wasn't that tough. They more or less immediately address the feedback
Hmm.
and so on, right?
So
And
basically,
then,
someone
sorry.
who has gone to inform. When you say formal process, that means involve HR and get it like a documented properly in a way it has to be.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, yes. Although as a best practice, even when it's informal coaching, meaning it's outside, it's not PIP, So basically those 30
Yeah.
to 60 days that happen before the PIP, ideally you should be documenting those things as well. So that
Yes.
way there's no surprise when somebody is put on PIP, there's no surprise, oh wow, I didn't see this coming, right? So as a
Hmm.
best practice, you should still be documenting and so on. And then once you move them to the PIP, you actually, follow the process, have a solid documentation. What
Hmm.
does that development plan look like? What were the issues, the root causes, right, with their performance? What are the milestones and goals, timelines, and what is the exit criteria? And then, sure,
Hmm.
if you need to involve HR,
Hmm.
you involve them, and so on.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing is now follow up on these kind of like questions. Um, in my opinion, either the person has started moving up, like he's like there's a graph initially I projected, and that person within like 60% or 60 at the 60% checkpoint, the person I could see the graph was moving up. So
Mhm.
even though we completed it, it's fine. Another case I've seen that checkpoints are important, like a 50-60% checkpoint, the graph is still low. So I had to
Mhm.
warn that person at that time, hey, you are not
Yeah.
moving the right direction. So let's either course correct, or if you move in this direction, eventually I have to let you go.
Yeah.
So at that point, there is a clear signal that you are not performing or you are performing, and most of the cases, person leaves. Uh,
Mhm.
I would say 10 to 15% of cases, the person have to tell that okay, this person is no longer required.
Mhm.
So it's a fine balance. I have to pick up in examples. So what is your recommendation in case if interviewer is expecting, oh, tell me the time that you fired a person. So should I
Mhm.
focus on the below 60% case and then the person leaves or on his own, or I have to let him go after the full cycle, which is like hardly any case, in my case.
Yeah, it's so either way is fine. I mean, if you have to pick, if you just look at that criteria, probably the one where you had to let them go, where you manage them out, is probably better because it
Okay.
was you that it was coming out with that decision. It's a challenging decision, tough decision, right, and so on. Versus when person leaves, it's sort of makes it easier for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the only criteria. There's other criteria, like I mentioned, the how senior the person is, how critical
Yeah, yeah,
they
yeah, yeah.
were, how there's all these other factors as well.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing I wanted to mention on specifically poor performer is if you are using example where let's say you put somebody on a dev plan or PIP and they were able to improve and you didn't have to manage them out. I mean, that's fine, but just make sure that you clearly articulate why was that a good decision? How did they truly improve their performance and that their performance stayed high? You
Mm.
don't want to come up with examples where their performance peaked, but then 6 months or 12 months down the road, they were in the same
In a sense.
same
Mm,
bucket, you know.
Okay, okay, okay. Got it. Maybe I'll come up with more examples and then
Mm,
eventually we'll talk about it. Okay, good. So
cool.
basically, as part of stories is basically the a collection of examples I should pick up. Uh, but I don't know the criteria against which I'm putting. Like, are there any buckets I should put into them? Like, there are so many stories. Like, you daily have some incident
Yeah,
with people, right? Daily have
yeah,
some incident with the
mhm,
projects. Daily have
yeah.
some problems with not daily. I mean,
Mhm.
continuously have some problems. So, how to bucketize these kind of stories?
So I would there's two ways you can go about it. One most natural one is go from questions, So, first go leadership principles. And again, there is
Okay.
about 10 or so important leadership principles that are more or less guaranteed to be covered in Amazon interviews. And then for each leadership principle, maybe to start with, you can pick one or two common questions, right? And then go through, the most impressive examples that you have. So that's one way to go about it. The other, and that helps and so on. At the same time, or after that, what you can also do, what I sometimes suggest folks is take a step back and think about what are in your career, say last 5 years, what are the most impressive things that you're most proud of, top five things or something like that. It doesn't,
Hmm.
it could be project or it could be hiring or building the team or whatever it is. And that way, the reason why I also suggest this exercise is to make sure that those examples, you map them to stories. So, if
Oh.
any of those examples that you're most proud of, you actually didn't think about covering them in the stories that, for leadership principles, well, then you should figure out how to map them and, if, how to make sure that you cover them
Hmm.
because you want to, if there was something, truly bar raising and something that separates you from the rest of the candidates, ideally, you want to make sure that it is surfaced in the interview.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Oh.
So, but I don't know if that helps. It's also important to go through that process and make sure that you're well calibrated,
Yeah.
you think about stories for each example. Like to your point, you mentioned, okay, each day you do a bunch of things, right? But typically those kind of examples, they're not kind of examples you use in interview, right? You don't
Yeah,
want
that's what.
to use something very tactical, but you want to use a bigger, more impressive example. So let's say, for instance, if I ask you about, hey, tell me about time you needed to solve a conflict with say, somebody more senior or whatever. You don't want to pick example where it was, something that happened this morning and then all it took is just one-on-one meeting and then bam, conflict resolved, right? Those are, very tactical, not impressive, everybody goes through it, right? But instead pick something that it was more meaningful, so he was confident about something more very important like strategy or so on. So it was very clear that, why that decision and the outcome of that conflict was important that had potential material impact and so on. How did you influence the other side? Did you write some sort of proposal? Did you work with their reportees and influence them? Did you collect inputs from others? Right? How did you evaluate pros and cons of your recommendation versus what they're suggesting? Right? how did you make sure that you understand that where they're coming from and that you're objectively evaluating it, and then how did you influence them without authority? And then what was the outcome? Was it, were you able to influence them successfully? Great. If so, was it the right decision? Was it not the right decision? Did you then, go that path and, in the end, was it successful? Do you have data points to demonstrate that it was truly right decision and so on, right? So,
Mm.
that example true, is more complex. It's more bar raising versus something that happens in a single day, for
Single
instance.
day, yeah, yeah. Okay, okay, okay. So, okay, okay. Got it, got it. So, so now coming to the templates. So as I was, earlier working on the stories, I realized I have followed a pattern. For example, in case of conflicts, any kind
Mhm,
of conflict, what I've
mhm,
seen, my pattern is,
mhm,
uh, first of all, acknowledge the conflicts happen, find
mhm,
out, like, then try and de-escalate. Either if it is between me and someone else, acknowledge, okay, thank you for your guidance. I appreciate it. I'll follow
mhm,
up with you. This is what, and then, and so de-escalate. If it is between two senior engineer, identify and then interject. Hey, okay, let's take it offline because it's taking,
mhm,
others are also involved and all the stuff.
mhm.
And
So,
knowing that,
yeah, but just super quick, yeah, the escalation makes sense 95% of times, but in some very time critical, urgent situations, you will actually need to make a call and figure it out on the, in the meeting, on the call or whatever, right? So,
yeah,
just a side note there.
yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, good, good, that point. Yeah, but most of the cases, it's I would de-escalate, then follow up. Follow up either with the two parties separately, or do your homework and do follow up with the person and resolve it. Resolve the. Well, I'm giving very high level template.
Yeah, yeah,
Resolve the issue. It will take multiple iterations, most of the cases,
yeah,
because
yeah,
issues are not solvable in just one
yeah,
go. And
yeah,
then equally important part is the communication to the stakeholders, because
yeah,
that decision is going to
exactly. Yeah,
impact. And
yeah,
that's it. And that's it. That's my
yeah.
template. I've seen what I've been following in real time as well.
Yeah,
And
yeah, and that's good. Couple things that I would add is in the initial phase, making sure that you understand where they're coming from, right?
mm,
So it's important, if there's conflict, let's say you proposing one thing, they're proposing something else. Understand why are they proposing something else? So that's also important. The
yeah,
other thing is, as a tactic to help aligning, agree at least on the common goals, right? So
yeah,
you might be, proposing this, they might be proposing that. But if you think about higher level, there are same goals that at least one goal that you
yes,
identify that
yeah,
you align on, and then work downwards from there.
yeah, yeah,
And yeah, it makes sense. And then the other thing, I think you might have mentioned it, but just to reiterate on it, um, when it comes to tactics in terms of or mechanisms that you use to aligning with folks, writing proposals, documents, right, that very clearly mention what is the challenge, what is that hotly debated topic, what is the conflict
prompts.
about, basically, what is your recommendation, details of it, pros and cons, what is their recommendation, what are other alternative choices, and then, like you mentioned, incrementally, reviewing those with the regular, with critical stakeholders to provide
Okay, okay,
to collect inputs and so on.
okay, okay. So basically, so okay, so now I got it. So it's
And
not.
sorry, just to very quickly add, depending on type of conflict, there might be
Yeah,
additional
yeah,
things.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
data analysis. Sometimes there might be proofs of concepts or pilots and so on.
So that's what, another follow-up question on that. This is what happens when you
Yeah,
follow up. There will
yeah,
be iterations that will happen.
yeah,
First, most of the time, first meeting is setting up the common grounds. That this is what my understanding is. This is what I was thinking about. These are the
yeah.
pros and cons I think about. Okay, and understand other person's view, and then iterate. So basically, but the challenge is 2 to 3 minutes. I have to communicate this. So I have to be very crisp
No,
with this.
well,
I
you
cannot.
have generally for main answers, or sorry, for answers to the main questions, you have about 3 to 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. That's what
Yeah.
I struggle with. Like, okay, how can I communicate all this crisp information within like 2 to 3 minutes of time?
Yeah, I mean, two
Uh,
minutes is probably way too
mm,
short because it's very hard to communicate all the important details
okay,
there, right?
okay, okay,
However, 3 to 5 minutes, it's way more reasonable, and I
okay.
mean, it's still challenging,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
depending on your communication style and how you go about it, you
yeah.
might struggle to keep it within 5 minutes, but yeah, aim for three to
Okay,
five
okay.
minutes
So,
for main answer.
so
Follow-up, answers the follow-up questions, they should be more to the point and
okay,
shorter.
okay. So now coming back to the templates,
Mhm.
do you think if, I mean, after telling the example, if I mention this kind of template, is it going to be helpful or no? Not needed.
I mean, templates are helpful at the beginning, right? But then later on, as you are preparing and as you're getting, great interviewer, I would worry less about templates, but more about the story overall and how it comes
Okay.
to you and so on, right? Keep in mind that you don't want to always sound mechanical. Okay, here's a template,
Yeah.
all that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
one thing. The other thing is
Okay.
L6 SDMs and above at Amazon, and I mean other companies as well. One thing that's being also evaluated in interviews is your executive presence and communication abilities, right? So if
Mm,
interviewer gets a feeling that okay, you always use this template and so on, right? Well, it might raise questions. Okay, well, how would you handle unknown scenarios? Like,
okay.
let's say, for instance, if I'm hiring you, one question, I might ask myself is, would I be comfortable you representing me in front of other directors and so on, right?
Mm, mm,
So, that's one thing. And then the other thing, is, so again, templates, are very helpful, especially at the beginning, but later on, as you get comfortable, I think, then you should think about the overall story quality and so on. The other thing I want to mention is most of questions, especially at Amazon, they are, this kind of format that you mentioned for behavior questions, tell me about a time, meaning questions that are asking about specific examples, right?
mm. Yeah.
However, that said, there could be more of higher level general kind of questions that are not necessarily asking about your experience doing something, but more around your philosophy or your methodology about doing something. So for
Mm,
instance, instead of asking a question like tell me about a time you build the largest team, that's asking, a specific example. I might ask you, how would you go about building a team in a new org?
yeah.
So it's
Mm,
and the reason why I mentioned that is because um, to answer that, a latter type of question, you don't necessarily want to go directly into example and answer it in a star format, right? But instead, you want to talk about it in general, so that way
mm,
you demonstrate your breadth of
mm.
knowledge on that topic and so on. Those kind of general questions, they tend to be very wide. And if you jump into example, then your answers stay narrow because usually
Similar.
examples, only, they're only challenging in some aspects and you only have to exercise certain things, but there could be other things that you might consider doing, right?
Okay.
Just a side
Okay.
note, those kind of questions, they're rarer at Amazon, but they could happen, they could come up here and there,
And I think,
especially across, more senior interviewers, that don't stick to the, Amazon question bank.
okay. Okay. So that means, and that's a honey trap as well, right? Identifying this, if I identified it wrongly, then it will be like, okay, too narrow or too wide.
Yeah, yeah. Now, yeah, and if you're not sure, let's say if you're not sure if interview is asking you, about example or just your general approach, it's okay to ask clarification question.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I think that is one thing. So next I will work on, okay, now since you mentioned leadership principles,
Mhm.
um, Amazon is, I mean, the interviews step by step. So once there will be
Yeah.
a phone screen, there will be like 15, 20 minutes. They will spend
Yeah.
on maybe 30 minutes. They'll spend on leadership, and the remaining part is system design. I think this
Mhm.
is the common one. Um,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
what are the top leadership principle I should focus on?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good question. Now, when it comes to pre-screens or phone screens, it kind of varies. Uh, it's not necessarily that always going to be, half of that, half hour or half of the, pre-screen is going to be spent on technical system design and stuff like that. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's much less. It kind of depends.
Yeah,
Depends on the interviewer, also depends on the hiring manager and what they instruct. So, for example, when I was hiring SDMs, L6 and L7 SDMs, we started with just covering quickly, technical depth for 10 minutes, but then turned out that a lot of folks, when they were coming to on-site, they were failing system design. So then I instructed folks, okay, do at least 20 minutes of system design, right? So it
Okay.
kind of depends on the organization, hiring manager, and all that. But so either way, system design is very important and technical depth as well. And by that, what I mean is, making sure that it comes through in the interview that you are able to understand technical decisions that your team is doing or that your team would be doing, right? And that you don't
Mm,
all over delegate all those things to engineers, but that you do understand and guide things and so on.
mm,
So for instance, one common question for that would be, hey, describe a system X that you own, that your team currently owns, and describe its architecture, what technology tech stack was in used and why, what were some of the main design trade-offs that you need to make, and so on.
mm,
So that's one. In terms of leadership principles that are important, so keep in mind, usually for each leadership principle, it's about 10 to 15 minutes, right? So that means in the initial screen, they're not gonna be able to cover all of them, right? But they're
yeah.
gonna, usually those are spread around. Some of the important ones are hire and develop the best. So this is includes both hiring and building the team, setting the culture, but also performance management, both
Mm,
promotions and the handling poor performers. Then earn trust is important, right? So things like conflict resolution, building relationships, and all that. Um, Deliver results is also important. So ability to deliver, through your team and others to deliver significant results and all that. Ownership. I mean, there's whole bunch of other ones. Customer obsession, ownership, dive deep. Backbone, disagree, and commit is also a very important one. Let's see what I forgot. Insist on highest standards. I mean, that one is important, but that one probably not won't be covered in the initial one. Invent and simplify is also important. How do you ensure that your team is focusing on a simple, fast solutions, but also innovates along the way as well when needed, and so on. So those are some of the most important ones.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And you mentioned briefly that there may be some set of questions that are commonly somewhere. Is it available somewhere where I can access them?
Yeah, if you just what you can do, even if you just go Google, you know, Amazon leadership principles covered for L6 SDMs, and then for each one, Google, Amazon questions for this leadership principle. Now,
Oh,
it's
okay.
gonna give you because over time, Amazon question banks surfaced, leaked to the internet. So that's a good starting point, but keep in mind a lot of experienced interviewers, and probably experienced interviewers will be the ones interviewing you. They don't necessarily always stick to the
Yeah.
question bank. They question banks are very helpful for folks that are starting to being interviewers at Amazon and so on. But folks after time, they pick their own ones, and then also those questions are rotated as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not asking about the question that is targeting, but my last point was stories to question mapping. So
Mhm.
once I'm done with the stories on the leadership principles, I will pick up a question, random question, and say, okay, let me see which stories maps where, and
Yeah.
then work on the complexity and all the stuff. So that's what I was asking about this. Now, my
Sure.
last,
Yeah, you can do that, but keep in mind that there's leadership principles can be very wide. So you can come up with, you can use a great example that you think is mapped to this leadership principle, but there's a bunch of different questions for that leadership principle, and it means that, the example that you're using, it might not be the best example for all those questions, right?
mm,
So, for
mm,
example, hire and develop the best. That's one leadership principle. But I could ask for that, the question could be, tell me about a poor performer you have to manage, or tell me about the most impressive promotion that you managed, or tell me about a time you had to hire a team from scratch. So there are
mm,
three different, very different
mm,
subtopics of that leadership principle, right? So
mm,
you know, you want to make sure that the example is directly mapped to the question being asked.
Yeah, that's what I was asking
Yeah,
about that,
got
because
it.
then I know the breadth of examples I need. Now
Yeah.
since we come to the example point, um, you know, I worked in Salesforce as a manager for around 5 years.
Mhm.
Uh, close to 5 years. I I have, and why I'm asking this is I'll tell you. And in my current organization, it's like I'm managing managers and all this stuff. Uh, the thing is, it has been 3 years since I left Salesforce.
Mm-hmm.
The complexity and the impact in that highly matrixed organization, I have examples from there. And if I tell you the comparison, they're complex. You'll clearly say, "Oh, sales, for examples, are much more complex than than the current companies because my current company is not that big." So, what is your recommend? That's another big challenge I'm
Yeah.
facing. That hey,
So
I'm
yeah,
coming up with
I'm
stories.
looking at your resume. Balance it out, right? You want to make sure that it doesn't come, that doesn't come up where every example you talk about is from Salesforce, because
Yes,
that raises the risk. Okay, well, what did you do last 3 years, right?
yes,
That's
yes.
one. So balance it out a little bit. And I'm sure there, pick take a step back and think about, okay, what were the most impressive things that you did at Grid Tech, right?
Okay.
And so on, right? So you want to balance it out. That's one thing. The other thing is I forgot to mention, but if you are interviewing for a line manager, so it's great that you manage managers and currently manage 25 plus engineers and so on, right? But you also want to make sure that it comes through that you will be able to be a very successful line manager, and that you're still able to roll up your sleeves and
Hmm.
stay connected to details.
Hmm.
You also want to make sure that the hiring manager doesn't get a feeling that the moment they hire you as L6 as DM, that you're gonna be asking about L7, and that you're gonna be looking
Ah.
at that you might be a flight risk, right? So that's
Hmm.
just a side comment to keep in mind.
Yeah. So, for example, if I'm so on how I understood what you said is, for example, again, let's go back to tell me a
Mhm.
time when you managed out a person
Yeah,
on the performance. So I have example for manager. I have example for a senior. I would say principal level engineer.
yeah,
So it's better to pick a principal level engineer example rather
mhm.
than a manager example because
Uh,
if I'm targeting L6, if
yeah.
L7, then pick up maybe a manager example.
Yeah, and that's great. The first thing is, whichever one you pick, I think it's good to just start with a sentence. I have multiple examples managing various roles, including managers and so on, right? And happy to talk about any of those, right? Now, if you truly 50-50 on those, you can ask interviewer, which one they would prefer,
Okay.
right?
So asking is fine.
If it is up to you, then I mean, again, you can use either one, but what I would utilize to figure out which example to use is which one is more bar raising, right? So both are, principal engineer and a manager. Well, great, both are senior role and so on, right?
Yeah.
That's a tiebreaker. But then, what were the nuances? How much did you need to coach them? How complex was the process? So use those other factors to help figure out which one was more bar raising.
Hmm. Hmm. Got it. Got it. Okay. 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 Yeah, I think that I got much more clarity and probably once I start writing down the stories and all the stuff. So stories come from uh projects, like complex projects
No,
or
and not just projects. It could be anything, right? So, I mean, performance, issues. That's one thing. It doesn't necessarily mean somebody's trying to performance because they're not able to deliver a project, but it could be other things. Like, let's say, okay, you talk about principal engineer. Well, maybe what they're struggling with is maybe they are great at delivering projects, but maybe they're not great at mentoring and making others
mentoring.
around themselves
Hmm.
better. Or
Yeah.
maybe they're not great at identifying process gaps or technology issues and thinking about high level strategically and so on, right? So it could be a bunch of different things, not just projects related. I mean, sure, there's gonna be a lot of things that will be project related, but there's gonna be a lot of others that could be anything, right? So it could be related to the roadmap, to projects. So we talked about to the strategy overall, to stakeholder management, to processes, to morale issues within the team. I mean, whatever it is, right? So there's a
Mm,
lot of different things.
mm,
Just make sure that it is, whatever it is, that the complexity and the impact is clear.
mm. Okay, now the last question.
Mhm.
Um, um, the repetition.
Mhm.
So it is like it is possible that my great examples
Mhm.
are very less,
Mhm.
but the questions come, I may repeat. So
Yeah,
what is your take on the repetition
yeah.
of?
Good question. So it's okay to repeat once in a while, but as a best practice, what I would do is the second time you mentioning it, like let's say you interviewing with a second interviewer and you're thinking about using same example that you used with a previous interviewer, it's okay, but give them heads up. Something like, hey, the first thing coming to my mind, the top thing coming to my mind is this and this, which I already discussed with this interviewer. Is it okay if I, talk about the same domain or project or whatever it is, right? Typically, they're gonna say yes, and yeah, but it's good to ask them so that way they don't ding you in a debrief. The other
Ah,
thing is the reason why it's okay is because even though you're using same example, you will be answering different question, meaning that you're gonna be covering it from a different angle.
yeah,
So that's one thing. The other thing I would mention is I would avoid using same example three or more times because then it does raise a red flag around, okay, was there a continuity and was it just one rockstar bar raising example that you have and everything else is kind of mediocre, so try to balance it out there.
hmm. Because the problem is, I may have like one or two examples which I think are rock star examples,
Mhm.
right? The others maybe, oh, I learned it from first time and then I applied that learning, so the example didn't come out, right? So you see what I'm saying? Like, so
Yeah,
I managed a poor performer at X level 2 years
yeah.
back, but now I know how poor performer. Now I have set up my process so that incidents get reduced. So going forward, those kind of examples will not be there. At least I learned from it. I mean,
Mm.
this is so you see what I'm
Sure.
coming to. So if that's what I'm saying, like that is what the biggest problem. Because I was talking to someone else a couple of years
Mm.
back and said, "Oh, if you repeat even once, you're dead. You will not."
Well, not necessarily. I mean, depends what it is, right? Because let's say, for example, you have a significant initiative that your team delivered where you had, I don't know, maybe 10 plus engineers working on it and it was a multi-year effort and so on, right? Well, probably as part of that initiative, given how massive it was and lengthy and impactful, probably, you could use it to answer multiple questions, right?
Yes, that's
For
what. Yeah,
instance, you could answer a question like, tell me about the most impressive project you delivered. You could also maybe answer it, tell me about a time you had a conflict with your, cross-functional peer, or maybe performance management, let's say principal engineer struggled, leading technical or, design for this, something like that, right?
yeah,
So in those kind of situations, sure, you can use, the same backstory when answering question, but how you're gonna be covering the details you're gonna be covering and all that are going to be significantly different. You know what I mean?
yes, yes,
Because you
yes,
can talk about the same project in a couple of these questions that I mentioned, but what are gonna be the actual content of your answer is going to be much different, right? So
mm,
that part is fine. Now, if the content is exactly the same, well, then that's more of a red flag. But it should not be the same because the question
yeah.
and the topic is different.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just last pointer I want
Mhm.
is will there be a repetition of questions in the sense somebody asking, oh, how did you manage a low performer? I don't know, same as question asked by someone else. What are
No,
the
no, it
chances?
shouldn't. No, it shouldn't. I mean, if it does happen, then it's by mistake. But yeah, it should not be happening. The reason why is because, and this is, the role of a bar raiser to make sure that every interviewer understands what competencies or leadership principles they need to cover, and
Okay.
that there's no repetition of leadership principles, right? So
Okay.
each interviewer is going to cover two to four leadership principles and maybe along the way, maybe some technical data points as well. And collectively, they're going to be covering, 10 to 12 leadership principles, whatever it is, right? So there shouldn't be repetition, and each one, should know exactly what they're covering.
Okay.
Now, there might be some overlap in questions where the questions are not exactly the same, but there could be, some similarities, some overlap. I mean, that's fine. It happens.
Okay. Okay. Because so if the question is same or similar, then it is more likely my answer, my example will be the same. Otherwise, most likely the example will be different. However, the projects may be the same.
Yeah, so the okay, I think just to clarify the example, when I mention example, I'm talking about the back story, how it happened, was it what was the situation, the project, and all that, right? But the exact thing that you're talking about, that part should be ideally different.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody asks you say you think they're asking you the same question, then uh, also as best practice, surface it. The second time when somebody asks you that, just surface it to them. Hey, I
Mm.
think so and so. We already talked about this topic. Would you still like me to answer it or not? Right? And
Okay. Yeah.
usually, if you surface it like that, and you should surface it because if you don't, then when it comes to debrief, they're gonna know, okay, I asked him this, you asked him this, right? Well, why didn't he tell to you that he already talked about it, right? So it's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's negative data point, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing is when you do surface it to them, then they will rotate to a different question,
Mm.
right? So
Okay. Okay. Okay.
do
Okay.
be be
Okay.
transparent there and mention it to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think we're right on time. Thanks for taking time. So what I'll do, I'll first start preparing on leadership principle and
Mhm.
possibly mapping them. And once I have this set of story which I think makes sense to me, I'll set up another because now you have background, my background
Yeah, it
in the
sounds
leadership.
yeah, that sounds great. And to accelerate things, one way I mean, different folks prefer different things. Uh, I would suggest a couple different things. One is you have a list of leadership principles again, quick Google search. You don't need to start preparing all of them. In the interest of time, pick say three. I don't know,
Three,
pick
yeah. Okay.
earn trust, deliver results, and hire and develop the best, for example,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then a couple questions for each one, and then you can very very briefly in a spreadsheet, for example, or something like that, you can come up with an example and just a bullet point data points on why you think that example is great, right? And then in the
Mm,
next session, we can very quickly go through stories, through each story for each that you mapped, for each question. Is it thumbs up or thumbs down? And why is it thumbs up? Why is it thumbs down?
thumbs up.
That
Hmm.
process itself is gonna help you validate, okay, the examples you're thinking about, are they truly, bar raising?
Mm,
And the other thing is, it's gonna help you kind of get a little bit more insight into thinking about, why is it not bar raising,
mm,
why it is, and that's
mm,
going to help you in the future preparation as
mm.
well. So that's one thing that I've seen,
Okay.
helps
Okay.
folks accelerate. The
Okay.
other thing is maybe later on, or completely up to you, have the actual mock interview, right, where it's
Yes,
a
definitely.
simulation of the actual interview.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm going to have.
Yeah,
Eventually, I'm going to go to that level.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Is there anything that I missed? There was one thing that was coming to my mind. So, uh, I don't know if you've seen, IK has this spreadsheet where is that got a section of EM where they've listed the stories themselves. Um,
Uh,
Not
Stories
stories, so
or
questions,
questions?
questions,
Yeah, yeah,
questions.
yeah, yeah.
So, do you think that will help, or I should start with leadership principle
Yeah, you can.
and
Yeah, that helps as well. Yeah, you can start with that. I mean, it's up to you. You can start with that. From what I recall, some of those questions they're not necessarily. I mean, some of them are very likely to be asked at Amazon. Others are not very likely.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you know.
And you kept mentioning L6 level, L6 level. What expectations? Where will I know those? What are those expectations are?
I mean, you're not gonna know exactly, but as L6 level, so L6 SDM versus L7 SDM, the expectations are different, right? So L6 SDM typically is a line manager. Sometimes they could be managing managers. L7 is managing managers, and typically starting point is 30 to no 35 to 40
Okay,
size org, but it could go up to 100, right?
okay,
So the expectation are different in terms of the scope and the complexity of the roadmaps and strategy they manage, the folks they manage, and so on, right?
okay.
So, but the good thing is questions are the same. More or less, they will be the same. It's just that the bar or expectations will be different.
Different. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay. So maybe that eventually that I'll converge to that, but right now I
Yeah,
don't
so
know that.
I know the good thing is it doesn't change your preparation process, right? So when we go through the questions, or sorry, the stories or examples you think about answering whatever questions, we can talk about, okay, is it bar raising for L6, yes or no? If it is for L6, is it also something that you can use for L7?
Okay, okay, cool. Yeah, okay,
Great.
cool. All right. Thanks,
Cool.
Anna. Thank you very much. I'll set up more session with you. Given that we have history now, you know. my history, and we've
Yeah.
talked about it, so it will be easier.
Sure. Yeah, so sounds great. If you have any, in the meantime, if you have any quick questions that you forgot to ask, feel free to shoot me email.
Okay.
Quick things we can address over the email. The
Yeah.
other thing is, I don't know how it works in up level. When you setting up mocks, it kind of does round robin. So if you want to set up sessions specifically with me, if that doesn't work out, you can just reach out to IK Ops. Hey, I have one
Yeah.
session, so and so, and here's my available times and so
Yeah.
on.
Okay. Cool. Cool. All
Okay.
right. Cool. Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank you,
great
Sinan. Thank you.
rest of the Friday and
Yeah.
great weekend.
Yeah. Thank you. Same to you. Same to you, Sinan.
Nice to meet you. Bye bye.
Nice meeting you. Bye bye.